Mexican bandits were planning to attack our bus. I was 8 years old, and I woke up to a dog barking and screaming coming from our backyard. My mom had a stalker for several years. The house where I lived as a child was broken into. When I was about 10 years old or something, I had an incredibly vivid nightmare that a huge severed arm was chasing me through a dark maze. Hello everyone, my name is Red Shock, and in this video, we will see the dark side of Reddit. It will be interesting, scary, and exciting. Let's go! I was on a 15-hour bus trip from the USA to Mexico with my family. It was late at night. After a few hours of driving, we stopped at a gas station to go to the toilet, have a snack, and so on. Everything was as usual until I noticed that there were a lot of police at the gas station. When we returned to the bus, the driver informed us that Mexican bandits were planning to attack our bus, and the police would accompany us to the end of the route. We drove and drove for hours on a sickening winding road with a cliff on one side. One police truck was driving in front of us and one behind us, each with 9 armed men. I was on edge the whole trip, but after a while I dozed off. This continued until the bus stopped abruptly. I remember looking out the window and seeing a bunch of big rocks right in the middle of the road. It was dark all around and nothing could be seen except these rocks illuminated by the lights of the bus. If the police hadn't been there, this is what could have happened. Step 1, the bus driver gets out, tries to remove the stones. Step 2, Mexican bandits kill the bus driver or take him hostage. Step 3, the bandits get on the bus. Step 4, robberies, rapes, murders. I was 17 years old. My skin is snow white, although all my family members look like Mexicans, and I knew exactly what would happen to me. Kidnapping for ransom, of course, was out of the question, but rape is a high probability. We were in the middle of nowhere, on a bloody fucking mountain. If there were no police, would I be here to tell the story? Probably not. It still haunts me. When I was 16, my parents left town for the weekend. It was cool because I had to stay at home for the weekend. I come home on Friday night and think about where to start: the internet, video games, or just watching TV until morning. Our living room was set up so that next to the TV there were glass doors that opened onto the porch in the backyard. I'm sitting staring at the TV, mindlessly switching channels, and suddenly I see some movement outside. At first I just brush it off, thinking it's a bird or a neighbor's cat. But then I notice that the object is much bigger than a bird or a cat. I come up with my face pressed against the glass, and I look at the backyard, and there's some dude squatting and looking into our house. Our eyes meet. I screamed to scare him, and he immediately got out of our yard. He scared me to death. It happened in my senior year of high school. My best friend and I were at her house, which was practically in a deserted place. We stayed there all day. Her mom left. We were supposed to meet a couple of friends. That night, in general, we spent the whole day fooling around and watching horror movies, and in the evening, we started going to a party. We went to the bathroom to get dressed and put on makeup. Suddenly, I had a terrible premonition of something bad. All the hairs on my arms stood on end. I don't know why. I suddenly panicked. To this day, it's the scariest thing I've ever experienced. I was drawing arrows on my eyes when it happened. I caught my friend's eye in the mirror and said, "We need to leave right now." I thought she was going to say I was being stupid or something, but she said she felt the same way and her blood was running cold. Out of a terrible premonition, we abandoned all our packing and immediately left the house. We headed down the driveway to the street where my friend's car was parked. We turned into the driveway and saw an SUV parked right in the middle of the street with no light. Suddenly, the headlights turned on at full power. The SUV honked and drove off. We covered the rest of the way and were already getting into her car and calling the police when her mom showed up. To this day, I do not know if it was a robber or someone else, but the fact that we both experienced a feeling of fear at the same time scares me to no end. I was 8 years old, and I woke up to a dog barking and screaming coming from our backyard. We go outside and see my dog chewing on a bloody shoe, and someone's gym shorts are hanging on our fence. We called the cops, and they investigated the footprints. They established that the robber wanted to enter the house through the window, but came across my dog, which quickly went into attack mode. The guy was caught and charged. My dog let them take my gym shorts and a shoe. She was very happy, and allowed the police to pet her as much as they liked. My mom had a stalker for several years. She was about 30 years old. I was about 3, and my brother was a year old. When it started, Dad left for work in the morning, and as soon as he left home, the call started. She answered the phone, and some guy said terrible things about what he would like to do to my mom. She was very scared and didn't know what to do. Sometimes the caller described what she was wearing at that very moment or what she was doing. My parents were in financial difficulties, so they couldn't just pack up and move, but my mom started spending more and more time at her mother-in-law's house. When her father was away, she filed a police report, but they couldn't trace the call. Finally, my parents were able to save enough money to move. I was about 6. By this time, the phone number had been changed and was not entered in the phone book. It was 1988, when landlines were still used in their new place of residence. The call stopped, but my mom had nightmares for years. When I was little, I remember walking into her bedroom in the morning, and she was crying into her pillow. I didn't understand it at the time, but later she explained that she woke up from a nightmare and was just shaking and crying. A couple of months after we moved in, the police informed us that they had finally caught this guy. He was our neighbor's 19-year-old son. He served in the army, but was discharged due to severe mental illness. I think he was placed in some kind of specialized psychiatric hospital. The lead investigator said that the guy was obsessed with my mother, and they found a box in his room with a bunch of photos of my mom when she was in the garden or playing with us in the yard. It chills me to the bone when I think about it now. Anything could happen to Mom when Dad was at work, and I was too young to help her. When my friend's father was about 17 years old, he decided to go camping with his friends. There were 8 of them in total. It happened in the Wisconsin forest. When they got to the place, they decided to split into groups of 2 to collect firewood and meet at the place. After about 20 minutes, one group did not return because there were 2 of them, a guy and a girl. No one panicked. Everyone joked that they were probably just having fun in some bushes. After about an hour, they decided that it was probably worth going to look for them, and went searching in the area where they were collecting firewood. They saw part of the girl's blood-stained shirt and the man's shoes lying nearby behind a bush. They quickly returned to their car to drive to the police office, which was a few kilometers away, and report the incident. However, they discovered that someone had leaked their gasoline, so they had no choice but to walk along the road to the caretaker's office. They saw a car passing by with one driver and 2 faces pressed against the window, which they believed were their friends, begging for help. Those people were reported missing and still have not been found. The house where I lived as a child was broken into. I was about 7 years old, and when I usually came home from school I was alone, since my sister was still at school and my parents were at work. The house stood at the end of the street. We had a big backyard and a huge shrub with a river running behind it, so it was kind of isolated. One day I came home from school and went to open the gate as usual and noticed that our front door had been broken into. I was only 7 years old, so I wasn't very smart. I continued to open the gate to enter, and when I entered, I heard several people running out of the back door. I entered the house and saw that the robbers broke in through the back window and just cleaned out our house. The point of the story is that they were still in the house when I came home, and when they heard the front gate open, they ran out the back door. They probably thought that my father, who was a policeman at the time, had come. If they had known that it was just a 7-year-old child, who knows what would have happened to me just thinking about it. My blood is running cold. When I was about 10 years old or something, I had an incredibly vivid nightmare that a huge severed arm was chasing me through a dark maze. I woke up in a cold sweat. I was shaking all over, but I really wanted to go to the toilet. I plucked up the courage, got up, and went to the bathroom. When I turned on the light, I saw that the hand was already waiting for me there. I screamed at the top of my voice, and then I really woke up. It turned out that I had a false awakening. Well, this is when you dream that you have woken up. In general, it was very scary to wake up and find that your nightmare had come true. Definitely the scariest moment of my life was the night after my dog was put down. The dog was not allowed to jump on my parents' bed. When we left the room, he still jumped on her and fiddled with the blanket. The dog was euthanized early in the morning. It happened suddenly, so Mom didn't have time to make the bed. After returning home, we sat for a while, grieved, and after that my mother began to do some household chores. I started by going to make the bed. I was sitting in her room at the time and saw her making the bed. The bed looked perfectly made after that. After she finished everything, we left the bedroom together and turned on the TV. My father, mother, and I were watching TV. There was no one else in the house but us. After a while, Mom got up and left the hall. I noticed her walking down the hallway, and when she saw the bed in the bedroom, Mom screamed sharply. The bedspreads were badly crumpled. I'd never seen such a mess on my parents' bed before. Such paranormal activity lasted for several days, and then everything just stopped. My parents are sure that the ghost of the dog did not leave us for several days. While studying at the university, I got a summer job in the same town where my cottage was located. I spent the whole summer living alone in this cabin. One night around 11 o'clock, I was watching TV when suddenly a big truck drove into my driveway. Keep in mind that I lived in a pretty remote place. I sat at home for a couple of minutes and thought about what to do. Meanwhile, the truck was idling and shining its headlights through my window. Instead of hiding, I grabbed a butcher knife, went out the door and yelled, "What the fuck do you want?" It turned out that the neighbor had forgotten that I had been living here for a week. I didn't have a car, but I rode my bike to work and told my visiting trucker friend that he could park here for the night. The poor, unsuspecting man was talking on the phone with his wife when suddenly I ran out of the house in my pajamas, with bulging eyes and a cleaver in my hands. It seemed to be one of the scariest moments of his life. Late one evening, I was riding my bike home and saw a big man with sunglasses coming towards me. He stopped me and said he didn't mind if I asked you a few questions. I was alerted by his words, so I replied, "No, I'm sorry, I have to go." And he drove on. A block away from this place, I had to stand at a red light. I looked back and saw this guy running towards me. He was already about 6 or 7 meters away from me. I got scared and started driving away. He was already a couple of meters away before I managed to drive away. You have no idea how fast I rode my bike. After about 3 or 4 blocks, I decided to look back, and the guy was still chasing me. I've never pedaled so hard in my life. I didn't slow down the whole way home. A few years ago, I was in an extremely deplorable emotional state. I had such attacks that I just lay in bed and wanted to die. Sometimes, when I was alone, I expressed my feelings out loud, cried, and so on. It was a pathetic sight, but at least it made me feel better. The most terrible thing happened during one of these attacks. I was lying in the dark on the bed in my bedroom. My husband went on a business trip for a month, so I felt very lonely and abandoned. It wasn't like that at the time, but as I said, I was going through a dark period. In general, I have repeatedly said out loud that I would like to talk to someone, why I am always alone, and so on. At some point, I heard something start moving in the corner of the room. Something big looked like a man was trampling on the spot, which made the floor creak, and there was a shuffling sound. I was immediately horrified. The sound only stopped when I threw a blanket over my head and begged to be left alone. I have no idea what it was, and I never want to find out. However, now I'm very careful what I wish for. Sometimes when I go to bed, I like to keep track of how strange thoughts are going through my head right before I fall asleep. Usually, a few minutes before I pass out, my thoughts turn into a bunch of nonsense that has no logic, but it seems cool to listen to them. A year ago, I was going through hard times. My girlfriend left me for someone else. The work was wildly stressful, and I found a new apartment only a couple of days before the lease of the old one ended, from where I had to move out a day or two before I was supposed to move out. I had already taken out all my things, and I had to sleep on an air mattress in the living room. There were no lights in the bedroom, and it was completely empty and uncomfortable. In general, once again falling asleep, I began to pay attention to how strange my thoughts were becoming. Nothing too unusual, just a bunch of random thoughts, phrases skipping through my head. But suddenly I heard a voice. It sounded clear, like a bell coming from somewhere in the room. It seemed to sound just a few meters away from me. I remember hearing, "Well, fuck him, we'll just open him up. Oh shit, he hears us." What was said in a flat monotone voice. I jumped up, and of course, I didn't find anyone. It was just a creepy auditory hallucination. But for a few seconds, it seemed completely real to me. It was further compounded by how strangely uncomfortable the apartment seemed to me at that moment. Many years ago, I went across the country alone to meet my family. I was supposed to drive to my friend's house on the way, but the weather was terrible and the traffic was slow. And at some point, a terrible accident happened right in front of me, and I was stuck in traffic for a long time. In total, I was 5 hours behind schedule. I was wildly tired. I needed to take a shower, so I stayed at a small motel that stood on the side of the road. It was clear from the outside that it was rundown and dirty, but in my case, it worked. There was a check-in window outside. The guy from there looked at me, I was still a student then, and asked if I was traveling alone. I handed him my ID and credit card, but he insisted that I pay in cash. It was the first alarm bell, but I still scraped together enough money and gave it to him. He handed me the key. The room was dirty. The bed took up almost all the space. The first thing I did was take a shower. Then I turned the mattress over and saw how dirty it was. There were signs of bed bugs on it. A moment later, I noticed a cockroach. That's enough for me. I decided that I would at least use the parking space and sleep in the luggage compartment of my SUV. I curled up instead of a pillow, put my suitcase under my head, and covered myself with some clothes. I fell asleep like that. I slept for about an hour, and I woke up to the fact that I heard someone talking on the phone outside. Looking up, I saw the guy from the reception standing outside. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. He finished. Then he quietly approached my room, opened the door with a key, and went inside. The light didn't turn on. After a minute or two, he came back out, slammed the door behind him, arguing with another guy. I didn't see the second one enter the room, so I still don't know where he came from. They talked irritably for a while, and then the guy from the registration came up to my SUV. I quickly covered my head with my shirt. Trying to open the locked door, he looked through the back window, but because of the tinting and the general confusion, he did not notice me lying down. From behind, the two of them walked away talking to each other. One of them gestured to the other side of the street, where there was some kind of snack bar. While they were distracted, I climbed into the front seat and started the car. When she started to drive away, they turned around in disbelief. I called my friends and told them everything. I didn't tell my family about it because I didn't want them to worry. When I returned home about 3 weeks later, thanks to Google Maps, we found out the name of the hotel and called the local police department. They told me that this place had closed just a few days before my call. That's all. Thanks for watching. You can watch other videos on the channel. They are now on your screen. Subscribe so you don't miss the new video.